You've asked it in silence. You've whispered it into your pillow when no one was listening. You've carried it like a weight, not in your hands, but in your spirit. Why did God let me suffer? Why the heartbreak that left you hollow? Why the betrayal that cracked your chest open? Why the nights where the silence didn't comfort, it condemned? Why the feeling that no one saw you, no one heard you, no one cared if you made it through another day? You were told that God is love, that He protects, that He guides. But where was that love when you were breaking under burdens you never asked to carry? Where was the protection when everything you touched seemed to fall apart? Where was that guidance when the road was dark, the map was torn, and all the signs pointed to dead ends? Let me say something to you now, not to explain it away, but to reveal what was always true underneath it. You were never forgotten. You were never forsaken. You were never alone. You were being forged, because no soul chosen to carry what you carry can remain untouched by fire. No one who is marked by Hev escapes the wilderness, and no one who is called to rise does so without first falling to their knees. So, chosen one, you weren't being punished. You were being prepared. You were not abandoned. You were activated. You didn't suffer because you were weak. You suffered because your spirit held something ancient, something eternal, something so weighty that comfort could never prepare you to carry it. And yes, it hurt. Yes, it confused you. Yes, it felt unfair, because transformation never introduces itself gently. Sometimes it comes through loss, sometimes through silence, sometimes through the very people who were supposed to protect you. You didn't just lose relationships. You lost versions of yourself that clung to lies. You didn't just endure disappointment. You endured divine detachment, removal of what couldn't walk with you into what's next. Every breakdown was a doorway. Every delay was a redirection. Every unanswered prayer was a realignment. But in the moment, it didn't feel holy. It felt like hell, and still you made it. You're still breathing, still walking, still hoping, even if it's in pieces. And that chosen one is sacred, because God doesn't choose the already strong. He makes strong those whom He chooses. You thought you were being broken, but you were being rebuilt. You thought you were being abandoned, but you were being anointed. You thought the darkness would bury you, but it revealed the flame inside you that could never be put out. Because what you carry, it's not ordinary. That's why your pain wasn't ordinary either. Do you know why it hurt so deeply? Why it lingered? Why it struck places in you that you didn't even know could bleed? Because your purpose isn't small. You were sent here to shake things, to wake things, to disturb what others are too afraid to question. And you couldn't do that from a place of numbness. You couldn't lead others out of fire if you hadn't survived it yourself. That's why your life never fit into neat boxes. That's why your joy always came with shadow. That's why your light always drew the dark, because you are not here to blend in. You are here to break cycles, and cycle breakers walk through storms the world doesn't even acknowledge exist. Chosen one, you didn't suffer because something was wrong with you. You suffered because something was right with you, so right that it scared people, so real that it triggered those still hiding, so powerful that darkness tried to silence it before you could fully remember. But it failed, because here you are, still breathing, still becoming, and even if you don't feel it yet, you are rising, not in spite of the suffering, but because of it. The pain carved space inside you for divine wisdom to live. It emptied you so that truth could take root. It hollowed you out so heaven could echo in your bones. And when it felt like no one was watching, no one was coming, no one was listening, eternity was. The suffering was never wasted. Not a single tear, not a single sigh, not a single lonely night. Every part of it was accounted for. Every ache was archived in realms deeper than you know. And now it's being transformed, not erased, transformed, because God doesn't remove your scars. He anoints them. He doesn't erase your past. He redeems it. And the same hands that let you fall were the same hands that caught you on the way down. He didn't stop the storm, because the storm was part of your becoming. He didn't stop the collapse, because the collapse was how you'd remember what was real and what was never meant to stay. So no, this wasn't punishment. It was permission. Permission for the mask to fall, permission for the lie to die, permission for the soul to awaken, and you awakened. Even if you don't know it yet. Every day you chose to rise, every time you whispered, "I'll try again," you were passing tests most don't even know exist. You are a soul that dared to keep loving, to keep hoping, to keep believing even when belief felt like betrayal. And that kind of soul, it shakes dimensions. So when you ask why God let you suffer, remember this. It's not because He left you, it's because He was with you in it. Because He saw who you were becoming, because He knew that the version of you the world needed wouldn't be born in peace, but in pressure, in fire, in silence, in sorrow, and still, you didn't quit, you didn't collapse, you didn't vanish. You transformed, and that's what no curse, no betrayal, no darkness could stop. This is only the beginning. There comes a point in every sacred story where everything that once made sense no longer does, where your name doesn't feel like yours, where your reflection looks like a stranger, where your prayers echo, but answers do not come. Chosen one, this was not confusion. It was consecration, because what you were being called into could not coexist with what you had become. You thought the suffering was the breaking, but really it was the forging. You were not being shattered, you were being shaped. Every betrayal you didn't deserve, every door that closed when you needed it open, every voice that went silent when you cried. It wasn't punishment, it was precision. You were being carved down to your essence, stripped of illusion, hollowed out of everything the world forced you to carry, so that something eternal could take its place, and it was brutal. Yes, it was not soft, not elegant, not romantic. It was wilderness. It was fire, it was grief that had no name, and yet you kept walking, some days crawling, some days barely breathing, but still, forward. That is holy. You didn't know it then, but your soul did. Your soul knew that this wasn't about survival. This was about becoming, because what you are called to carry cannot be built on comfort. It is built through pressure, through exposure, through the ache of standing alone, when all you want is to belong. You weren't abandoned. You were set apart. They couldn't understand it. They thought you changed. They called you cold, distant, ungrateful, but they never saw the fire. They never saw what it cost to not scream, what it took to keep loving, to keep hoping when everything around you screamed, "Give up." But you didn't, because some part of you, deep beneath the sorrow, still believed, not in the world, not even in yourself, but in something, a whisper, a pull, a knowing. That this pain meant something, that there had to be more than this, that somehow all of this would birth something too big to explain. And it has. Look at you, not perfect, not untouched, but alive, and not just alive, awake. You're seeing now, aren't you, that the things that broke you were also the things that built your voice, that the nights that left you breathless taught you how to breathe with intention. You know now that healing doesn't mean erasing pain. It means honoring it. It means carrying your scars like scrolls, written in tears but sealed in truth. You've become the type of soul that feels storms before they form, that senses betrayal before the mask slips, that sees light where others see shadow. And that gift, it didn't come cheap. You earned it in silence, in shadow, in sacred solitude, because no one saw the nights you held your own soul together. No one heard the battles you fought without sound. No one knew how many times you looked at the sky and whispered, "Please don't let this be for nothing." And it wasn't. Every broken moment was a blueprint, every loss a redirection, every ache a signal. God wasn't watching you suffer to test you. He was watching you remember. Remember your strength, remember your origin, remember that the fire you feared was the same fire you came from. This is not spiritual theory. This is lived theology. You've lived what others only preach. You've become what others only write about. And that's why it had to happen this way, because your wisdom cannot be borrowed. Your faith cannot be scripted. Your truth cannot be replicated. It was forged. And the forging isn't pretty. It burns away what doesn't belong. It removes what doesn't serve. It silences what doesn't align. That's why people left. That's why the job ended. That's why the dream dissolved. Because they were never meant to survive your becoming. Chosen one, you didn't fail. You graduated, you didn't collapse. You ascended. And now, you don't just believe in your light, you protect it. You don't just carry purpose, you embody it. You don't need applause to feel real. You don't need approval to stand firm, because now you know this was never about pleasing the world. It was about remembering your assignment. You were sent here to disturb patterns, to end cycles, to echo truth, and you couldn't do that with everyone's love. You had to do it with God's permission, and that permission came through pain. But now you are ready, not because you've healed every wound, but because you've stopped hiding them. You now walk in your truth, not clean, but consecrated, not flawless, but forged. And when people ask how you did it, you'll smile, because they will never know what it took to rise from what tried to bury you. But your life will say it all. You thought the fire came to destroy you, but fire doesn't always burn to break. Sometimes it burns to reveal. Chosen one, you didn't lose yourself in the flames. You found yourself through them, because the truth is, what was real in you never burned. What was eternal in you never crumbled. Only the false things fell. Only the borrowed identities melted. Only the pieces that weren't truly you turned to ash. And isn't that what hurts the most? Not the fire itself, but watching what you thought was you collapse into smoke. The friendships, the roles, the version of you that smiled through pain just to keep the peace. All of it gone. Not because you failed, but because you outgrew the illusion. You were being emptied to be reintroduced to the truth you were born with. Not taught, not learned, remembered. Because the soul doesn't evolve by addition, it evolves by subtraction. What they took from you was never yours. What you lost was making room for something too vast to be contained by the old you, and that's why it felt like death. Not physical, but identity death, ego death, false self-collapse. It felt like you were disappearing, but really, you were being discovered. Your truest self wasn't formed in comfort. It was forged in the furnace, and every time you asked, "Why is this happening to me?" the universe was whispering, "It's happening for you." Because the calling on your life required a version of you that the world had never seen. And to meet that version, you had to release the one you built to survive. It wasn't wrong. It got you here, but it couldn't take you further, so it burned. And in the ashes, a new self began to rise. Not made of performance, but of presence. You stopped needing to be liked. You started needing to be true. You stopped seeking permission. You started standing in alignment. You stopped asking for answers. You started listening to your knowing. And that knowing, it's sacred, because only those who've walked through fire learn how to recognize gold. Only those who've been torn open learn how to discern what's real. And you are no longer fooled by pretty lies. You are no longer impressed by noise. You are no longer available for people who only want to touch your light but cannot sit with your shadow, because the fire didn't just purify you. It taught you to see. It taught you to feel before facts, to pause before pleasing, to pull back your power from places that never knew how to hold it. And yes, you paid a price, a high one. You paid with years of loneliness, with tears that left no explanation, with silence that echoed louder than applause ever could. But you didn't just walk through it. You stayed through it. You didn't numb it. You named it, you let it ache, you let it teach, and that's what made you dangerous to every illusion you used to live in. You see, suffering doesn't just hurt, it informs. It introduces you to yourself. It shows you what you cling to and what you're willing to release. It shows you how much noise you've allowed into sacred space, how many masks you've worn just to be accepted, how much light you dimmed just to avoid being misunderstood. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's where you are now. That's why the old life feels foreign. That's why the old connections feel like noise. That's why you're suddenly allergic to anything that costs your peace. It's not a breakdown. It's a breakthrough. The version of you that was built for survival is giving way to the version built for sovereignty. You are no longer living from reaction. You are moving from remembrance. You remember now who you are, why you came, what you're carrying, and that remembering makes you radiant, not perfect, not above pain, but deeply, divinely anchored. You don't need the fire to stop anymore, because you're not afraid of what it reveals. You know now, whatever burns away was never you to begin with, and what remains, that's the real you, the one they couldn't control, the one they couldn't manipulate, the one they tried to break but only awakened. So don't mourn what's gone. Bless it, release it, thank it for what it taught you, and let it float away like smoke. You don't need it anymore. You have you. And that is enough. Not everyone remembers. Some forget the moment it hurts. Some lose themselves in the silence. Some bury the pain so deep they never return to it again. But not you, chosen one. You didn't forget. You couldn't. Even when your hands were shaking, even when your voice broke mid-prayer, even when the world screamed, just move on. Something in you refused to let go. Something in you, ancient, wordless, unbreakable, kept whispering, "This matters." Don't forget. That whisper, it was your inheritance, because you were never chosen for strength. You were chosen for memory. God knew you would remember. Not with your mind, but with your bones, with your breath, with the ache in your chest that wouldn't leave, even when others denied what happened, even when they minimized your pain, even when the world tried to label you bitter, dramatic, too sensitive. You knew. You knew this wasn't just grief, it was transformation. You knew this wasn't punishment, it was preparation. You knew you were walking through something sacred, even if it didn't look holy on the outside, because when you carry divine DNA, you feel the shift before it arrives. You feel the lie before it's spoken. You feel the battle in the spirit long before it shows up in your life. And that's what set you apart. Not perfection, not knowledge, not even discipline, but sensitivity to truth. And that truth, it kept waking you up. Every time the world tried to put you back to sleep. You were never meant to forget who you are, but the world tried anyway. It tried with betrayal, with neglect, with shame disguised as structure, with expectations that shrank your light and called it humility. It tried to numb you, to flatten you, to train you out of your intuition, to replace your knowing with performance. But the truth lived too loud in you, so loud that you couldn't keep pretending. And when pretending no longer worked, everything fell apart. Not because you failed, but because your soul refused to betray itself one more time. The collapse was mercy. It didn't end you, it freed you from versions of yourself that weren't built on truth. Freed you from lives that demanded silence in exchange for acceptance. Freed you from roles that asked you to carry everything but your own purpose. Because God didn't choose you to perform, He chose you to remind, to walk through fire so others would see that survival is possible, to hold sacred space where others could be broken and still beloved, to be a living answer to questions the world is too afraid to ask. And that's why your suffering had to be witnessed. Why it couldn't be hidden, why it had to stretch you in public so that your healing could ripple through generations. You didn't suffer privately because your purpose isn't private. You weren't called to just heal. You were called to embody remembrance. You are here to remind the world what it forgot about God, about truth, about sacredness, about themselves. That's why your journey has been so intense. Because to carry that kind of vibration, you had to be stripped of everything shallow. The loud praise, the hollow applause, the shiny versions of self that crumbled in darkness, all of it gone, so that only you remained, the real you, the raw you, the rooted, resurrected, radiant you, the one that doesn't need to perform to be loved, the one that doesn't need to be seen to know they exist, the one that doesn't need to prove their value through pain anymore. You see now, don't you? The version of you that survived is the version that remembers. And that memory has become your map. You walk differently now. You speak differently, not because you trained harder, but because you've returned. Returned to who you were before the world told you who to be. And that return, that's why you're untouchable now. Not because you've healed every wound, but because you stopped believing they defined you. You let them ache. You let them breathe, but you no longer let them speak over your identity. Chosen one, what made you dangerous to darkness was never your strength. It was your ability to stay open, to feel when others shut down, to believe when others built walls, to weep without shame, to walk by faith when nothing made sense because the world teaches us to forget. But your soul, it came to remember. And in that remembrance, you were always destined to rise. There are departures that don't feel like release. They feel like rupture, like being torn away from something you never imagined surviving without. But chosen one, what felt like rejection was actually rescue. They didn't leave because you were unworthy. They left because your frequency no longer supported their access. And yes, it hurt. Because you loved them, because you trusted them, because your heart didn't come with conditions. But theirs did. Still, the silence that followed wasn't absence. It was alignment, because what you carry now cannot coexist with what you used to tolerate. And what you tolerated was never holy. You accepted less because you hadn't yet remembered your full worth. You allowed certain voices because your own hadn't risen to its rightful volume yet. But the breaking, the loss, the slow and painful unraveling of relationships that once felt like home, it was all part of the design. Because God didn't just remove people. He revealed them. He showed you who clapped only when you were silent, who stayed only when you stayed small, who loved you best when you didn't shine too brightly, and as your light began to rise, they began to squint, to look away, to pull back. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you became a mirror they weren't ready to look into. Some of them saw your elevation as abandonment. Others felt your boundaries as betrayal. But you weren't abandoning them. You were returning to you. You weren't betraying the bond. You were honoring the truth. And the truth was, they couldn't go where you were headed, not because they were bad, but because their role was complete. They were chapters. You are the book. And when God turned the page, they were not written into what came next. You see, chosen one, there's a loneliness that doesn't mean emptiness. It means refinement. It means heaven has cleared the room so that nothing distracts you from what you came to carry. It's not a punishment, it's precision. Because too many voices can drown out divine instruction. Too many hands can hold you back from what you're meant to reach for alone. And what you're reaching for now, what's being prepared, cannot be diluted. You were never meant to stay where you started, and not everyone who began with you was built to finish beside you. So let them go, let them fall away without dragging their ghost behind you. You don't need to prove that you were good. You don't need to prove that you tried. Heaven knows, God saw, and that's all that matters now. Because this isn't about them anymore. This is about you, stepping fully into the frequency they weren't built to survive, and now you're free. Not because it didn't hurt, but because the pain didn't change your heart. It revealed it. You are still soft, still loving, still open. But now you're clear about who belongs, clear about what you need, clear about what peace feels like when it's no longer negotiated. And that clarity, it's protection. It's the answer to prayers you forgot you prayed. God, show me who's real. God, bring me into alignment. God, don't let me miss what's meant for me. And he answered, not with thunder, not with fanfare, but with silence, with exit, with absence. And in that absence you found the sacred, the stillness, the remembrance. The rhythm of your own soul, no longer drowned out by opinions. You hear yourself now, and what you hear is holy, so let them go. Let them remain where they are. No bitterness, no blame, just blessing, because now you know they were never staying. They were sent to serve a season, to teach, to trigger, to turn you inward. And once that mission completed, they had to exit. This is not a wound, it's a transition. You are not grieving what's gone. You are growing into what's next, and what's next does not require them to understand, only for you to accept that what walked away was never the destination. You didn't just make it through, you transformed inside it. You didn't just survive the storm, you became the stillness after it. Chosen one, this was never about enduring until it passed. It was about becoming who you were always written to be, because the suffering wasn't random. It was coded, engineered, woven into your timeline, not as a detour, but as the doorway, and you walked through it, wounded, tired, confused, but still walking. And that walk, it rewrote everything, because now you don't move like someone who's afraid to break. You move like someone who's already been shattered and found sacred in the fragments. You carry peace now, not because everything makes sense, but because your spirit does. You no longer need reasons. You carry revelation. You no longer seek closure. You've stepped into completion, not because it's all healed, but because you've been held by something unseen, something ancient, something holy. You know now what they never told you, that suffering, when surrendered, becomes sacred. That pain, when honored, becomes purpose. That silence, when inhabited fully, becomes sanctuary. And you have become a sanctuary for others, for light, for truth. The very thing that tried to hollow you became the space where heaven chose to dwell. You don't wear bitterness, you wear understanding. You don't walk in vengeance, you walk in wisdom. You don't repeat the pain, you repurpose it. Because now you see your story was never just yours. Every breakdown you lived through is a bridge for someone else. Every tear you cried was water for a seed in someone else's spirit. Every silence you endured became a language for those still trying to find words. You are no longer the one needing saving. You are the signal that saving is possible. The ones watching you now, they don't know how you made it. They don't know how you kept showing up when it would have been easier to disappear. But that's the mystery, isn't it? That what tried to kill you activated you. That what tried to bury you became soil. And now you grow in places they swore would never hold life again. Now you build in foundations the world considered ruined. Now you rise without noise, because you've realized your glow says more than your story ever could. You don't owe anyone an explanation. You are the evidence. You are what it looks like when God takes a soul and rewrites it with light. You are what happens when pain becomes prophecy. You are what remains when everything unnecessary is burned away, and all that's left is sacred. So don't shrink now. Don't apologize for how radiant your truth has become. Don't dim the fire that took a lifetime to protect. Because you didn't just heal, you resurrected. And resurrection isn't about going back to who you were. It's about becoming who you were always meant to be. This isn't a return, it's a reveal. The version of you they were afraid of, the one they tried to break, silence, diminish. That version lives now, not in fear, but in full command of divine timing. You don't seek the old anymore. You don't mourn what didn't last, because now you know some things didn't survive the fire because they weren't supposed to. You didn't lose them, you released them. You didn't fail, you fulfilled. And now you walk differently. Not because you want to be seen, but because your presence has become the sermon. Your story preaches, your eyes carry thunder, your breath echoes memory, and your silence carries power. Because it was never about what they did to you. It was always about what God was building through you. Chosen one, you weren't ruined, you were resurrected. And the truth, it was never meant to break you, it was sent to awaken you. And now that you're awake, nothing can put you back to sleep again. You thought resurrection was the end of the story. But chosen one, it was only the unveiling. Because what rises after death doesn't come back the same. It doesn't fit where it used to belong. It doesn't move how it used to move. You've become unfamiliar even to yourself, not because you're lost, but because you've been found. Found in the fire, found in the silence, found in the space that felt like abandonment, but was actually divine preparation. You're not who they remember, because you're not who you were. And the world may try to call you back to who you used to be, to the roles you once performed, to the expectations you once obeyed. But that version, it was a placeholder, a survival suit, a temporary identity that held you until your truth returned. And now you walk uncloaked, unhidden, unmasked. Not because it's easy, but because it's sacred. You've stopped rehearsing worthiness. You've stopped negotiating your essence. You've stopped shrinking just to fit into rooms that were never designed to hold you. Because when heaven writes your resurrection, it doesn't send you back, it sends you forward. Forward into unfamiliar clarity. Forward into holy solitude. Forward into spaces where your presence alone shifts the atmosphere. Yes, it's lonely. Yes, it's strange. Yes, it costs more than you can explain, but it's real, and you've spent too long pretending not to crave real. So you stopped craving applause. You stopped chasing validation. You stopped building bridges to places that already burned. Because now, you know, resurrection requires release. Release of the past. Release of performance. Release of narratives that painted your power as a problem. You've wept enough, you've waited enough, you've wandered enough, and now you're rooted, not in what you used to be, but in what you've become. No longer begging for belonging, no longer searching for signs, no longer asking for permission to speak what your bones already know. This isn't rebellion, it's remembrance. Remembrance of who you were before the world told you who to become. Remembrance of the fire you came from, not the fear they handed you. And with every breath you reclaim that fire, not to destroy, but to refine. You are the refinement. You are the echo of unburned truth. You are the flicker that refused to die. And now that you've emerged, you carry something rare. Clarity without bitterness, authority without ego, conviction without cruelty. You don't need to explain yourself anymore. Your alignment speaks louder than your defense. Your integrity speaks louder than your history. You used to carry pain like a question. Now you carry it like a compass, not asking, why did this happen to me, but declaring, this is what it revealed through me. Every scar, a scroll, every tear, a template, every ache, a map back to truth. You are not hardened, you are hallowed, and the world may not understand it. They may label it arrogance. They may call your boundaries betrayal. They may mistake your silence for pride, but that's because they weren't with you in the furnace. They didn't watch you break without bitterness. They didn't witness the war inside you that never made it to the surface. But heaven did. Heaven saw the nights you curled into yourself like a question mark and rose like an answer. Heaven saw the moments you wanted to quit, not just life but belief, and still chose to whisper, I'll try again. And that whisper, it moved mountains, not the ones outside you, the ones within. So now you walk not with certainty, but with sacredness, because sacredness doesn't need certainty. It walks with mystery. It breathes in trust. It surrenders the need to understand for the power to remember. You've remembered now, and that memory, not of events, but of essence, has made you unstoppable, not because nothing can hurt you, but because nothing can unmake you. You've already been undone. You've already been deconstructed. You've already been burned to the bones of your becoming. And what remained? That's the real you. So when the world asks, "Where have you been?" you'll answer without words, because your presence will speak what your pain once buried. Your peace will testify. Your silence will preach. Your stillness will echo the storms you survived. They will see the glow and assume it came easy, but you will know this glow is holy. This glow was paid for. It is the residue of resurrection. So don't shrink. Don't edit your essence. To soothe those still hiding, don't apologize for how deeply you've become yourself. Because the ones still sleeping will either awaken in your presence or disappear from it. Either way, you don't stop. You were never meant to sleepwalk through this life. You were never meant to blend in. You were never meant to carry borrowed names and call them yours. You came to remember, and remembering is what made you dangerous. Dangerous to darkness, dangerous to illusion, dangerous to anything that depends on your forgetting. So stay awake, chosen one, stay tender, stay true, stay rooted in the fire that refined you. Because this world is starving for the kind of light that only resurrection births, and you carry that light now. Not as a trophy, not as a weapon, but as a torch that will set others ablaze, a flame that will awaken what has long slept in others. Your resurrection wasn't just for you, it was a signal, a call, a shift in the atmosphere. Heaven is speaking through you now, and it's saying, the time for silence has ended, the time for shrinking is over, the time for sacred embodiment has begun. So rise, not with force, but with frequency, not with noise, but with knowing, not to prove anything, but to be everything you were always becoming. This is your season of revelation. This is your chapter of clarity. This is your testimony, written not in ink, but in essence. You are the word made flesh, the prayer made presence, the fire made form, and the world will never be the same because you remembered. And now you walk in resurrection. But even now, even as you rise, even as your breath no longer trembles, there are echoes. Echoes of who you once were, of who you had to be just to survive, of the silence that shaped you before the words ever arrived. And those echoes, they don't haunt you, they hold you, because you no longer run from what broke you. You walk beside it now, as witness, as teacher, as proof. Proof that a soul can shatter and still shine, that a heart can be pierced and still pulse with divine rhythm, that a spirit can be pressed but not crushed. You've become the paradox, both thunder and whisper, both flame and water, both ache and answer. And it's that paradox that makes you dangerous to darkness, because you've stopped needing to explain your pain in ways the world can digest. You've stopped turning your scars into poetry for people who only read comfort. You've stopped inviting unready eyes into rooms your soul bled to enter. Not from pride, from protection, because what lives in you know isn't fragile, but it is sacred. And sacred things are no longer thrown to those who trample what they do not understand. You don't rise to be seen anymore. You rise because stillness is no longer an option. You rise because fire keeps burning even when no one is watching. You rise because truth does not need a platform, it needs a vessel. And you are that vessel now, not made of what was easy, but made of what was eternal. So no, this is not ego. This is essence. This is what resurrection looks like when it has nothing left to prove, and the world will feel it. They will feel it in your silence. They will feel it in your refusal to shrink. They will feel it when your no is holy and your yes is rooted. Because you've stopped moving from fear and started moving from fullness. You've stopped seeking what was never designed to carry your calling, and in that release, you've become luminous. Not because the pain is gone, but because the light inside you has finally outgrown the wounds. You don't pretend anymore, you embody, you don't react, you respond, you don't prove. You simply stand, because everything you lost was never the foundation. Everything that left was never the anchor. The only thing that remained was what could never be taken. Your knowing, your fire, your breath, your divine assignment, and that is why you're still here. not to repeat what was, but to become what is, not to explain the breaking, but to illuminate the becoming. You were always the flame. They just mistook your smoke for ruin. But you know now what smolders is not dead. It's waiting, it's deepening, it's gathering breath for ignition. So breathe, chosen one. Not the breath of survival, but the breath of sovereignty. Breathe like someone who remembers that being here is not random, that your scars are not shame, that your silence was never empty, it was preparation. And now it's time to speak. Not loudly, not forcefully, but purely. From the marrow, from the memory, from the molten center of everything you thought would undo you. You are not undone. You are not unfinished. You are unfolding, and every step forward isn't just movement, it's declaration. That the story never ended in the fire, that the silence was never the last word, that the sorrow never had the final say. Resurrection wrote a different ending, and you are living proof.